Hi, my name is Karli Keller, and I am a senior here at Meredith, who is majoring in political science. As part of my thesis for political science, I worked under the research question, how does race and gender affect voter perception of political candidates? Obviously, I am more connected with the gender aspect of my research since I am a white woman. However, I still think it's imperative to study and understand issues that don't directly affect you, hence the image I chose for this slide, which is a quote by Lauren Morrill. In this presentation, I will discuss my literature review, the methodology behind my study, the results I received, the analysis I did on them, and the conclusions I drew based on that analysis. For my literature review, which is essentially a study of what scholars and researchers have found before me on this topic, I split it into three separate categories. The first of which is the underrepresentation of women in office, because women have long been underrepresented in political office, which I found in this research. For example, in 2019, the United States ranked 86th out of 152 nations in terms of women in political office, which is according to the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report. However, women's representation is on the rise, especially in federal offices. The second category was the underrepresentation of Black and other minority candidates, where I found that people of color as a whole are also severely underrepresented in political office, and women of color experience even higher rates of underrepresentation. However, these numbers are improving as well. For example, we saw a historic number of women of color elected to the 116th Congress of the United States of America. The third category was the importance of candidate appearance in voting behavior. I looked very closely at skin tone while doing this research and found a concept called the dark-skinned penalty, where studies have shown that having a darker skin tone can elicit more negative stereotypes than having a lighter skin tone. Additionally, incidents affect candidates of color more than they affect white candidates. For example, there was a study that was done with two candidates, one white, one Black, and they were given the same story of sex scandal. However, the white candidate took less of a hit with voters than the Black candidate did. To research this topic myself, I worked under the hypothesis that yes, gender and race will affect voter perception of political candidates. I did a survey with an experimental aspect to it. For sampling, I did a cross between convenience sampling and snowball sampling. For convenience, it was convenience sampling because I sent it to people that I knew, people that were around. For example, I sent it to family and friends. I also sent it, my study to the Democratic Club and the Republican Club on campus and had them complete the Qualtrics survey that I created. As it's snowball sampling because they then took that survey and sent it to their family and friends, and they sent that on past that, and so on and so forth. So it was a snowball effect. Now, the first part of my study was a survey, which consisted of questions regarding women in political office, people of color in political office, questions measuring racial resentment, and demographic information. The second part of my study was an experiment where I used images of actual political candidates and photoshopped them to have a lighter skin tone, a darker skin tone, and be unaltered. And each fourth of the respondents was given a different candidate. The respondents were asked 3 questions. Which of the following is the unaltered photo of the candidate? Based on the photos, please rate how likely you are to vote for the candidate. And please rank these photos in order of most electable to least electable. Now, these are the images that I used. This is obviously a photo of Kamala Harris, our vice president. The photo on the left is the unaltered version, or not the unaltered version, it is the lightened version. The middle photo is the unaltered version. On the right-hand side is the darkened version. This is Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina, and it's the same deal, lighter, unaltered, darker. And then I used two politicians from the United Kingdom, Janet Davy and Darren Henry. And I used politicians from out of the country to control for familiarity bias, because it can be assumed that most people know what Kamala Harris looks like, especially after she was elected as VP. And I wanted to make sure that people weren't going to make their assumptions just based on knowing the politician. So I used politicians that it was likely that they wouldn't know. For my survey, I got 105 responses. Now, the results were contrary to my hypothesis. I found that there was more support for women and candidates of color than I had expected. For example, 70% of respondents considered women and men to be equally good political leaders, and that 80% considered white people and people of color to be equally good political leaders. For my experiment, only 1/4 of the respondents actually participated in this section of the study. Many retroactively reached out, which is the nice thing about sending this to people that you know. They said that they needed more information about the candidate, and they didn't want to make decisions based on electability or who they would vote for based on their skin tone. And this was an anonymous survey, so I am confident that social desirability wasn't an effect on not wanting to make this decision. But I really feel that they just needed more information on the candidates themselves. To do an analysis of my results, I performed cross tabulations where I compared the answer to demographic questions to the answer to some of the political questions. The demographics I used were age, education, gender, political ideology, and race. I chose to highlight in this presentation gender and race, as well as education. For gender and race, the respondents were asked, in general, do you think men or women in political office are better at representing the interests of people like you? And 63% of the respondents said that women were better at representing the interests of people like them. Now, I made some inferences based on this. One was that women are more compassionate and empathetic in the eyes of society a lot of the time. And so people felt that women would be able to represent them well. However, I also noted that the vast majority of my respondents were women. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but the vast majority of my respondents were women. And so it can also be that they felt that only women can best represent women. And you can also see that 59% of the respondents said that both races would be equally good at representing the interests of people like them, which can also infer that race is not as big of an influence in representing the interests of your constituents as gender is. However, only 12 of the 105 respondents were people of color versus the vast majority who were women. So that can also be the reason behind this. My second cross-tabulation was on level of education. The respondents were asked which of the following comes closest to your opinion of men and women as political leaders. 67% said that they felt men and women make equally good political leaders, and 80% of those respondents had at least some level of higher education. They were also asked which of the following comes closest to your opinion of white people and people of color as political leaders. 80% said that both races would make equally good political leaders, and 90% had at least some level of higher education in answering that question. Based on this, I came to the conclusion that education could be a method of getting more representation for women and people of color as political candidates and coming to more acceptance of them as candidates. And again, there was more support for women and minority candidates than I expected. So if I was to continue research on this topic, I would do a deeper analysis of education, because it is the one demographic that could be modified and changed and made more accessible to people. So I think it could create a greater amount of representation for women and minority candidates in politics. I would like to thank Dr. McLennan for being my advisor throughout this project and for all of his help and reassurance and answers to my questions. And I would like to thank everyone who helped me distribute the survey and took the survey and provided thoughtful feedback. My contact information is listed. My Meredith email is the best way to reach me. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you all watching this.